June 30th, 2099, 7 hours and 15 minutes in the morning. The Minneapolis suburbs are shrouded in a light morning haze. 15-year-old Jason Elliott hugs his parents one last time before boarding the yellow Bluebird school bus. No one suspects that 5 days later there will be nothing left of the boy but a backpack and a camera on the shore of a lake. 10 years later, in an abandoned cabin 18 miles from Camp Pine Lake, Hunter discovers something that will shock all of Minnesota. In the Elliott's two-story home in the Eden Prairie neighborhood, where neatly mowed lawns are juxtaposed with classic mailboxes, 15-year-old Jason was preparing with uncharacteristic introvert enthusiasm for his first solo trip to Pine Lake Summer Camp. Located 200 miles north, almost right near the Canadian border, the camp attracted teens from all over the state with its nature program and the opportunity to observe rare natural phenomena. He would literally count the days, marking them off on the Samsung calendar we gave him for Christmas, recalls Jason's mother, Karen Elliott, holding up the last family photo, taken on June 25, 2099, at 18 hours and 45 minutes. In the photo, Jason stands between his parents, his lean figure appearing tense, but his eyes read impatience and anticipation. A lover of photography and nature, Jason dreamed of capturing on his new Canon EOS Rebel T1i camera the northern lights that could sometimes be seen in those parts of the world, even in summer. His parents spent nearly $700 on this gift for the end of 9th grade, where Jason earned top marks in science. He's always been a special kid, says astronomy teacher Robert Jenkins, with an uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw only the chaos of stars. In his office at Eden Prairie High School, he keeps Jason's astronomy project, a detailed map of the constellations of the Northern Hemisphere with handwritten notes in the margins. Jason had no close friends at school, preferring to spend his time studying books on astronomy and wildlife. School psychologist Susan Livingston noted in her report dated May 14, 2009, Jason shows signs of mild social anxiety, but has healthy self-esteem and clear interests. Encouraging socialization in a supervised environment with peers of similar interests is recommended. That's why his parents insisted he go to camp, hoping he would find like-minded peers among other teens. The Pine Lake Camp brochure, with colorful photos of teens observing through telescopes, promised unforgettable astronomy nights and expeditions with professional naturalists. I remember helping him pack his North Face backpack. He took Nikon Monarch 5x42 binoculars, a National Geographic Star Atlas, and a tattered, leather-bound diary he always carried with him, says Jason's father, Robert, who still keeps his son's room untouched. In a glass display case on the wall is a collection of minerals Jason collected during family travels, each specimen neatly labeled and dated. The Elliott's neighbor, 72-year-old Eleanor Pierce, often saw Jason in the garden behind the house with a Celestron Astromaster telescope. He was such a polite boy, once showing me the craters on the moon and explaining how they were formed, she recalls, wiping away tears with a Kleenex tissue. Who would have thought that a man dedicated to the study of celestial bodies would become one of the missing stars himself? A week before he left, Jason began assembling a special first aid kit for the trip. A medication log found later in his room contained methodical entries for Claritin anti-allergy medication, Neutrogena SPF 50 sunscreen, and Off Deep Woods insect repellent. On the last night before leaving, the family had dinner at Jason's favorite restaurant, Olive Garden, at Penn Avenue and 77th Street. According to waitress Maria Gonzalez, who has worked there for 6 years, the boy seemed excited but happy and kept talking about the stars and constellations he was going to observe. He was especially looking forward to seeing the Milky Way away from the city lights. The restaurant's surveillance cameras, a recording of which is preserved in the police archives, captured the Elliott family entering the establishment at 18 hours and 32 minutes. The footage shows Jason chatting casually with his parents, occasionally showing something on his LG Voyager smartphone, presumably pictures of constellations he planned to observe. That night I could hear him pacing around the room, Karen Elliott recalls, checking and rechecking his luggage, turning the Maglite flashlight on and off, testing Duracell batteries. He couldn't wait to leave, but there was also some anxiety. Maybe a premonition? I think about it a lot now.
Jason was last seen alive by his parents on the morning of June 30th, 2099, at 7 hours and 15 minutes. CCTV footage from the school parking lot where the bus left for camp shows Jason hugging his parents one last time, slinging his North Face backpack onto his shoulder, and walking up the steps of the yellow Bluebird bus. He was wearing Levi's jeans, a blue t-shirt with the NASA logo, and a dark green Columbia windbreaker. Bus driver Thomas Wilkins, 53 years old, recalls, he sat in the 11th seat on the right, alone, pulled out a book and immersed himself in reading. Virtually no interaction with the other guys on the trip. Only occasionally looked out the window, especially when we got outside the city and the scenery changed to pine forests. No one could have predicted that this quiet boy with a Canon camera would become the central figure in one of the most mysterious disappearances in Minnesota history and lead to the solving of a series of crimes that shook the entire Midwest. It is the 5th of July in the year 2009. Dusk descends on Pine Lake, bringing a welcome coolness after a hot day. 23 hours and 30 minutes. The counselor, Timothy Bryce, is doing his evening turn in the Polaris cabin. Jason Elliott's bed is empty. None of the 12 boys have seen him since dinner. 72 hours later, searchers find his backpack and camera on the shore of Wolfang Lake. No bodies would be found a week later, a month later, or a year later. According to Cook County Sheriff Michael Jennings' official report, document #CR-09-07-145, on July 5, 2009, at 23 hours and 30 minutes, Counselor Timothy Bryce reported Jason Elliott absent from his cabin after evening turn-in. Dining hall surveillance footage analyzed by the investigation shows Jason for the last time at 17 hours and 15 minutes, leaving the building, holding a notepad and a Canon camera. No one was concerned at first, Bryce, 22, says in his testimony. Jason often secluded himself to take pictures or observe the stars. But when he didn't return by 9 p.m., I started asking the other guys. Jason's roommates testified that he had mentioned wanting to photograph the sunset from the eastern shore of the lake, known for its picturesque cliffs. We immediately organized a search of the campgrounds, involving all staff and older kids with Maglite flashlights. But by 2 a.m., the search was inconclusive, noted Camp Director Margaret Wilson's statement to police on July 6th at 10 hours and 15 minutes. Meteorological data for the 5th of July records clear weather, a temperature of 74 degrees Fahrenheit and a slight northwest wind. That night, an entry appears in the camp's duty log, seized by the investigation, in the hand of night guard Frank Morrison. 0142. Heard strange sounds from the North Trail, like a metallic scraping sound. Checked the perimeter. Nothing suspicious. Morrison would later fail to give a precise description of the sounds, but would emphasize their unusual, non-natural character. At 6 hours and 45 minutes the next morning, a search party volunteer found Jason's backpack and his Canon camera on a rocky ledge near the northeast shore of Wolfang Lake, 3 miles from the main campground. An image from the discovery site, taken by forensic scientist Eric Peterson, shows a neatly folded, dark green North Face backpack with the camera on it with the lens cap removed. Nearby is an open bottle of Dasani water and an overbitten Cliff Bar energy bar. When I saw these things stacked neatly on the rock, as if they had been left there on purpose, a chill ran down my spine. It looked too deliberate, recalled David Thornton, the search team leader, in an interview with Minnesota Monthly magazine on September 22, 2019. Thornton, a former ranger with 15 years of search and rescue experience, adds, "In my career, I have seen dozens of cases where people have drowned or gotten lost in the woods, but never has an accident victim put their belongings away in such a ceremonial."
Forensic analysis of the backpack's contents revealed no valuable personal items. The leather-bound diary mentioned by the parents was not found. The memory card in the camera contained 34 pictures taken between June 30th and July 5th. Views of the camp, group photos, sunsets, starry skies. The last image, taken on July 5th at 20 hours and 12 minutes, captured an unusual atmospheric phenomenon: a faint northern lights over the lake. "This last shot is particularly disturbing," commented forensic photographer Janet Reed. "The composition is perfect. The exposure calibrated to perfection. It doesn't look like a random shot, or like the photographer was in a rush or panic. This is the work of someone who had time to adjust all the settings." The discovery of the items immediately shifted the focus of the search to the waters of Wolf Fang Lake, a body of water up to 140 feet deep and known for its cold currents and dangerous undercurrents. The massive operation involving divers from the Cook County Sheriff's Department, cinematologists with bloodhound dogs from Duluth, and a Bell 407 helicopter from the Minnesota National Guard lasted 12 days. "We surveyed every foot of shoreline and water area within a 1-mile radius of where the items were found," explains dive team captain Steve Anderson. "We used echo sounders, thermal cameras, worked the grid. If there was a body there, we would have found it." In his July 15th technical report, Anderson notes the unusual cleanliness of the bottom in the suspected drop zone, as if someone had recently cleaned it of the usual lake debris. Working in parallel with the divers was a team of searchers with movie dogs. "Our dogs led us several times along the trail from the campground to where the backpack was found, but the trail dropped off further," said dog handler Mary Clark. What was particularly odd was that the trail didn't go into the water, as it does in drownings. It just disappeared into the rocks. The water temperature of the lake at this time of year was only 43 degrees Fahrenheit, which precludes the possibility of prolonged survival by accidental fall, reads the report of the county medical examiner Dr. Elizabeth Rayner, dated July 22, 2009, on the basis of which the case was classified as a water accident. At a press conference held on July 23rd, Sheriff Michael Jennings officially announced the end of the active search. "Unfortunately, all indications are that the boy died as a result of a water accident. It is likely that the body became snagged on underwater structures or was carried by the current into areas of the lake inaccessible for examination." Meteorologist William Hawkins of the National Weather Service notes that unusual atmospheric activity caused by a solar storm was observed over Cook County on July 5th. This explains the northern lights captured in Jason's last photo. Such phenomena are extremely rare for Minnesota during the summer. The boy was really lucky to see it, if I may say so. Jason's parents strongly rejected the official version, pointing to the strange circumstances of finding their son's belongings in the absence of a body. "My son couldn't just wade into the water, especially alone and in the dark. He was always a cautious, rational child," Robert Elliott said in a meeting with District Attorney Sarah Thompson on July 28th. The
The strained relationship between the family and investigators erupted into a public confrontation during a press conference at Grand Marais City Hall on August 7, 2009. At 14 hours and 30 minutes, in front of dozens of reporters, Karen Elliott unfurled a homemade poster with a chronology of inconsistencies in the official investigation and the words, "We're not leaving until we know the truth." The local newspaper, the North Shore Chronicle, quoted an anonymous police source as saying, "We understand the parents' pain, but they have to accept the facts. 11 missing people in Cook County over the past 20 years have never been found because of local hydrology and topography." By the end of August 2009, public interest in the case began to wane. Parent-organized volunteer search parties had dwindled from 40 to 10 people. In September, Robert and Karen Elliott posted a banner on Route 61 with their son's picture and a hotline number. But during the fall, they received only 5 calls with no meaningful information. No one knew yet that the truth about Jason's fate hid not in the cold waters of Wolfang Lake, but in the depths of human memory, which would not reveal itself until 10 years later. The 18th of May in the year 2019, Forest Superior, 13 hours and 20 minutes. Hunter Frank Peterson and his Labrador Baxter deviate from their usual route. The dog freezes, the fur on his scruff rising. A moment later, Baxter takes off and races through the dense undergrowth. What they discover among the juniper thickets will turn the story of Jason Elliott's disappearance and the 4 other teenagers who have gone missing over the past 15 years. Spring in northern Minnesota has been cold and rainy. Rainfall 3 times the seasonal norm eroded forest roads and trails, forcing Hunter Frank Peterson, 57, to change his usual route in search of white-tailed deer tracks. Through dense juniper thickets, impassable in dry weather, there was now a narrow but discernible trail made by rainwater runoff. I would have passed by if it hadn't been for my Labrador Retriever Baxter, who suddenly began barking frantically and tearing toward this time-blackened structure, as if something supernatural had caught his attention. Peterson recounts in his police statement to the Cook County Sheriff's Department at 18 hours and 45 minutes that same day. The cabin, about 12 by 14 feet square, was cleverly disguised to look like a natural landscape. The roof was covered with sod, the walls were covered with moss and lichen, and the only small window was covered from the inside with a thick khaki-colored cloth. According to Peterson's testimony, recorded by Detective Alan Morgan, the structure looked abandoned, but at the same time preserved intentionally well. Not a single leak in the roof, the door on sturdy hinges. Photos from the discovery site, taken by Cook County Sheriff's Department forensic scientists, show a narrow path leading to the cabin through a nearly impenetrable wall of shrubbery. Wilderness survival expert and FBI consultant Daniel Crawford notes in his May 22 report, the location of the structure was chosen with exceptional knowledge of the terrain. It is in a kind of natural hollow, sheltered from the wind, invisible even from the air, and located out of cell phone range. Inside the cabin, investigators found a strange collection of personal items, a tattered, leather-bound diary that belonged to Jason Elliott, a Timex wristwatch with the initials DE engraved on the back cover, an Eddie Bauer backpack with the Little Falls High School logo, and a Columbia winter jacket with a Minnesota Wild hockey team patch. What we saw in that cabin was like a horror museum. The walls were hung with pictures of sleeping boys taken without their knowledge, and under the floorboards we found something that led to an immediate call to the St. Paul forensics team. CNN's May 20, 2019 report quotes Detective Samantha Griffin as saying, "Records in the police report indicate that the first sign of something sinister was an odor. Despite the cool weather, the cabin had a distinctive sweet-smelling odor that every experienced investigator recognizes instantly, notes forensic scientist Brian Ellis in his report, who arrived on the scene at 15 hours and 30 minutes.
The metal detector used to search for evidence was the first to detect the anomaly under the wooden floor. After removing 3 floorboards, a shallow pit lined with plastic hefty garbage bags was discovered in the northeast corner of the hut. Inside were human remains. The area around the shack was immediately cordoned off. Cook County Sheriff James Morrison ordered a temporary operations headquarters set up directly at the discovery site. Iridium satellite phones provided communications with the central office, and 5-kilowatt Honda generators allowed the deployment of a mobile forensic lab. Forensic analysis, led by Dr. James Hawthorne, confirmed the worst fears. The remains found in the cabin belonged to 5 different teenagers, including Jason Elliott, as determined by comparing DNA to samples provided by the boys' parents. The nature of the injuries to the skeletal structures indicate a violent death. The victim's skull bones showed multiple traumatic lesions caused by a blunt object, presumably an Est-wing geological hammer, which was found among the evidence. The official medical examiner's report dated May 27, 2019, noted. Among the evidence seized from the cabin are 7 cameras of various brands, including a Canon EOS Rebel T1i digital SLR camera belonging to Jason, 13 notebooks containing notes and newspaper clippings, a collection of 23 watches of various brands, and a Stanley toolkit in a metal case. Detective John Ramirez, a serial crime specialist, notes, "The cabin was organized with clinical pedantry. Each item had its own strictly defined place. Even the remains of the victims were neatly arranged according to a specific system, which speaks to the psychological profile of the perpetrator. Extremely organized, methodical, and highly intelligent." On one wall of the cabin, investigators found a calendar of sorts, a map of northern Minnesota with locations and dates marked in red dots. 5 of those dots matched the locations where the missing teens' belongings were found. 3 dots were marked with a question mark and dates for future months. A particularly disturbing detail noted in the FBI report was the physically impossible position of Jason's remains. His spine was curved in a way that, according to forensic anthropology expert Dr. Margaret Wu, made it appear as if the body had been folded in half backwards, which is impossible for a living person and indicates post-mortem manipulation of the body. "In my 20 years of practice, I have never encountered anything like this," Dr. Wu commented for the June 3 edition of Scientific American 2019. The spine was bent at an angle exceeding 180 degrees, which is contrary to the anatomical capabilities of the human body. It should be noted that such manipulation requires not only considerable physical strength, but also some anatomical knowledge. A careful examination of Jason's diary found in the cabin revealed entries that cut off on the 4th of July in the year 2009. The last entry, in the boy's neat handwriting, reads, "Senior Counselor R.C. invited me for a personal tour today. He says he knows a place from where you can take amazing pictures of the northern lights. We're going out after lights out. I hope the weather doesn't let up." Karen and Robert Elliott, Jason's parents, after 10 years of not knowing, finally got confirmation of their worst fears. "It's weird, but in a way it's a relief," Karen says in a June 1 interview with the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. "All these years we've lived suspended between hope and despair. Now we can at least begin the process of saying goodbye." The discovery in Superior Forest not only answered questions about Jason Elliott's fate, but also raised new ones for the investigation. Who else knew of the cabin's existence? Who built this horrifying museum? And the most disturbing question, were there other victims that authorities don't yet know about?
The answers to these questions came unexpectedly, from a source that for 10 years had kept the key to solving this crime in the depths of his own memory. The 25th day of May, 2019, 8 o'clock and 30 minutes in the morning, Cook County Sheriff's Office. The officer on duty, Lisa Connolly, takes a call that will change the course of the investigation. On the other end of the line is a psychotherapist from Minneapolis. His patient is haunted by nightmares about the night Jason Elliott disappeared. Nightmares in which he sees a man leading a half-asleep boy through a dark campground. A man who has gone unpunished for 10 years. My patient, Michael Davidson, age 25, suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, manifested in the form of recurring nightmares that began after a news story about a discovery in the Superior Forest. Reads a transcript of a phone conversation with Dr. Alan Bergman, provided to investigators and made part of official case hash CR-19-05-278. Hennepin County Emergency Psychiatric Services records show that Davidson sought help on May 21st at 23 hours and 17 minutes after panicking after watching the evening news on KARE-11. According to the psychiatrist on duty, the young man was extremely agitated, exhibiting tremors of the extremities and hyperhidrosis, continuously repeating the phrase, "shiny thermos." Michael Davidson, a skinny programmer with an anxious look, as Detective Samantha Griffin describes him in her report, was one of 42 teenagers at Camp Pine Lake in the summer of 2009. He lived in the Polaris cabin with Jason Elliott and 4 other boys, according to camp records. "All these years I had trouble sleeping," Davidson is quoted as saying in a transcript of an interview conducted on May 26th by Detectives Griffin and Alex Murphy. "I often woke up from nightmares, but I didn't remember the content of them. It wasn't until I saw a picture of that cabin in the woods on TV that something clicked in my mind. The memories came back with such force that I couldn't breathe." Michael Davidson, a former Pine Lake camp counselor who was there at the same time as Jason, began recalling repressed memories of the night of the disappearance. "That night I woke up around midnight and saw the head counselor Raymond Carlson leading a half-asleep Jason out of our cabin, holding a Stanley thermos in his hand. I remember the moonlight reflecting off its metallic surface, creating an eerie glow that haunts me in nightmares to this day." Davidson is quoted as saying in an affidavit sworn on June 1, 2019, at 14 hours and 15 minutes. A videotape of the interrogation, conducted in the presence of 2 psychologists and Davidson's attorney, shows the young man shrinking in his chair as he describes his memories. "Jason walked swaying as if in a trance. His eyes were half open, but his gaze was absent. Carlson was holding him by the shoulder, guiding him. In his other hand he had this thermos. I was frightened and pretended to be asleep. In the morning, I convinced myself it was just a dream." Dr. Bergman, who specializes in traumatic memories, states in his official report, "The dissociative amnesia observed in Mr. Davidson is a typical defense mechanism in witnessing traumatic events during adolescence. Memory retrieval is often triggered by sensory triggers. In this case, an image of the cabin and mention of items found there." Detectives determined that Raymond Carlson, 45, worked as a senior counselor at Camp Pine Lake from 2006 through 2010, after which he changed his name to Richard Connors and moved to Wisconsin, where he took a job as a nature teacher at Cedar Hills Private Boarding School. Photos from the camp's archives show a tall man with a military bearing, always dressed in an impeccably ironed khaki uniform, with a survival instructor patch. Former camp director Margaret Wilson, interviewed on May 27th, recalled, "Carlson was a model employee, punctual, disciplined, great with children, especially the reserved and unsociable. He had a military background, saying he had served in the Rangers, although we never checked his service record.
An analysis of Carlson's movements over the past 13 years revealed a disturbing pattern. In every facility where he worked, there were disappearances of male teenagers between the ages of 13 and 16 that were written off as runaways or accidents. FBI Special Agent Janet Rossi reported in her report, dated June 5, 2019. A search of the federal VICAP, Violent Crime Analysis Program, database revealed 7 cases of missing teenage boys in the 3 states where Carlson worked, 3 in Minnesota, 2 in Wisconsin, and 2 in Michigan. All of the victims fit a certain type: introverted, intellectually gifted, passionate about science, with no immediate circle of friends. We are dealing with an organized, intelligent predator who carefully selected his victims and created the conditions for the crimes to be committed safely, concludes FBI profiler Dr. Megan Jensen in a research brief attached to the May 30th case file. A search of Carlson's home on the outskirts of River Falls, Wisconsin, conducted on a warrant on June 7th at 6 hours and 30 minutes, revealed a carefully hidden cache under a bedroom floorboard containing the missing boys' personal items. Among them, a Jason Elliott stargazing diary with entries clipped to the 4th of July in the year 2099. We also found a collection of 5 Estwing geological hammers, on one of which, despite thorough cleaning, forensics found microscopic traces of blood, DNA from which matched Jason's DNA. Notes Detective Mark Rodriguez in an interview with ABC News on June 10, 2019. Carlson's digital device archive included a 2-terabyte Western digital hard drive with date and location cataloged photos of all the victims. The metadata of the photos identified the exact locations of the crimes and the times that coincided with the periods of disappearance of each teenager. Of particular interest to investigators were 2 details mentioned by Michael Davidson and corroborated by evidence: the Stanley thermos and the condition of the victim. Forensic investigators found 10 thermoses of various brands in Carlson's home, 3 of which were Stanley Classic models. Toxicological analysis of the residue of substances in one of them revealed traces of benzodiazepines, potent tranquilizers. We assume that the perpetrator used a hot drink with dissolved tranquilizers to make the victims drowsy and disoriented, commented forensic toxicologist Eric Thompson. This would explain the trance state described by the witness and the lack of signs of a struggle at the scene. On June 8, 2019, the Federal District Court of Wisconsin issued a warrant for Raymond Carlson's arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Jason Elliott. By this point, the investigation already had enough evidence to link him to the disappearances of 4 other teenagers. The only question that remained was, where was the suspect now? The answer came from an unexpected source. On June 9th, at 10 hours and 12 minutes, Jennifer Price, the administrator of the Cedar Hills boarding school, called the police station in Appleton, Wisconsin. Richard Connors hasn't shown up for work since May 28th, right after the news of the discovery in the Superior Woods. But this morning he sent an email announcing his return and his planned June 11th expedition with a group of 7 students to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. The clock was inexorably counting down to another tragedy, and investigators had not only to arrest the killer, but also to prevent possible new victims. June 11th, the year 2019. 5 o'clock, 15 minutes in the morning. Cedar Hills boarding school is immersed in pre-dawn silence. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear silently take up positions around the natural history teacher's wooden cottage.
300 meters away, in the gymnasium, 7 teenagers are packing backpacks for an expedition. None of them knows yet that their teacher is a serial killer who has chosen his next victim. The operation to apprehend Raymond Carlson was conducted by a joint team of the FBI and Wisconsin State Police on June 11, 2019. At 5 hours and 15 minutes in the morning at Cedar Hills boarding school. Video from the agent's chest cameras shows morning haze billowing between the pine trees and the silhouette of a man methodically stowing gear in the trunk of a Ford Explorer SUV. He offered no resistance, only asked if he could take his Stanley thermos, the same one featured in Michael Davidson's memoir. And that cold calm was perhaps the most eerie aspect of the whole apprehension, recalled the operation's leader, Special Agent Thomas Baker, in an interview with The New Yorker magazine on October 3, 2019. Footage of the detention captured the moment when Carlson, seeing the agents approaching, slowly lowered his arms, tilted his head slightly, and uttered a phrase that sent a chill down the spine of everyone present. "I have waited 10 years for you." Immediately after uttering these words, according to Agent Maria Gutierrez's testimony, the suspect turned his head and looked directly into the lens of the surveillance camera, as if knowing exactly where it was. During a subsequent search of Carlson's private office on school grounds, forensic investigators discovered a cache of Western Digital USB drives, cleverly hidden in the hollow leg of an antique Hemingway desk. The digital devices contained cataloged photographs and detailed crime diaries, which the suspect kept with the methodicality of a scientist documenting an experiment. His entries are characterized by a clinical detachment and an almost scientific approach to the murders, forensic psychologist Robert Anderson notes in his conclusion. Victims are described as specimens or subjects, and the killing process as a release of potential. Among the documents found, a map of the Superior National Forest with red-dotted locations where the victims' bodies were hidden was of particular importance to the investigation. This information allowed investigators to locate the remains of 3 more missing teens: Andrew Collins, 2007, Kyle Peterson, 2010, and Josh Wilkins, 2014. The discovery of the remains was an emotionally difficult moment, but it also brought welcome relief to families who had lived in agonizing obscurity for years, commented Sarah Jenkins, Missing Persons Family Support Program Coordinator with the Minnesota Department of Justice. Laboratory tests conducted at the FBI's Quantico Crime Center confirmed that the Stanley thermos seized from Carlson at the time of his arrest contained traces of the powerful sleeping drug zolpidem, at a concentration 5 times the therapeutic dose. Carlson's psychological profile points to a classic case of an organized serial killer who spent years perfecting his method and selecting victims according to a certain type. Introverted, intellectual boys with an interest in science and no close social ties, concludes forensic psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Chan in her expert report submitted to the court on September 15, 2019. During the first interview, videotaped at trial, Carlson remained remarkably calm. Detective John Ramirez notes, his pulse did not rise above 60 beats per minute, even when presented with photographs of the victims. He spoke of his crimes as a job or project, without the slightest sign of remorse or emotional response. Raymond Carlson's trial, which began on November 4, 2019 in federal court in Minneapolis, lasted 37 days and garnered national media attention. Judge Michael Johnson, known for his integrity, instituted unprecedented security measures after Carlson received several letters from fans expressing admiration for his methodical nature. A key witness for the prosecution was Michael Davidson, whose recovered recollections were a turning point in the investigation. Under cross-examination by the defense, which attempted to undermine the credibility of the suddenly returned memories, Davidson remained steadfast, detailing the events of that night, including such small details as the creaking floorboards near the third bed and the peculiar smell of pine and metal emanating from Carlson. In the courtroom, Carlson never once looked in the direction of the victims' families, Emily Thornton of the Washington Post wrote in a report. But when Michael Davidson testified, the defendant never took his eyes off him, tilting his head slightly as if watching an interesting natural phenomenon. On December 12th, after 8 days of deliberation, the jury rendered a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts. 3 days later, Judge Johnson sentenced Carlson to 8 life terms without parole, ensuring that the perpetrator will never go free. Justice was served today. Although nothing will bring our son back to us, we hope that this verdict will provide some comfort to other families and prevent future tragedies, Karen Elliott said after the jury's verdict was announced on December 15, 2019, at 17 hours and 20 minutes. The only words uttered by Carlson after the verdict remain the subject of debate among criminal psychologists. They saw what others did not see. They deserved better understanding. That phrase, recorded by a court stenographer, became the epigraph to the book The Predator Among Us, written by journalist Michael Corrigan. The former Pine Lake camp, closed back in 2011 after a series of financial scandals, remains abandoned, becoming a place of pilgrimage for relatives of the victims and lovers of macabre tourism. Crumbling wooden buildings, moss-covered walkways, and a shabby pier on the shores of Wolf Fang Lake create an atmosphere of desolation and grief. Locals from the nearby town of Grand Marais claim that on moonless nights, the ghostly figure of a boy with a Canon camera can be seen on the lakeshore, pointing the lens into the night sky. Local North Star Cafe employee Jack Simmons, 64, said, "I've seen him twice. It's like he's waiting for the stars to reveal some secret to him. It's not scary, more like sad." After the trial, the victims' families created the Starlight Foundation, which helps teens with social anxiety and adjustment problems. Each year, the foundation organizes a summer camp, where children can develop their academic interests and social skills in a safe environment, under the supervision of carefully selected and vetted professionals. Michael Davidson, whose recovered memories led to the solving of crimes, now works as a child safety consultant and lectures on the importance of trusting intuition and internal alarms. This case reminds us that the worst evil is often hidden under the mask of the ordinary, and how important it is to listen to your intuition, because Michael Davidson's subconscious held the key to solving this crime for 10 years, until the moment when the truth could come to the surface, reflects prosecutor Jeffrey Dawson in the documentary Forgotten Testimony, released on Netflix in March 2020, and became one of the most watched projects in the genre of true crime. The case of Jason Elliott and other Raymond Carlson victims is now studied in FBI academies and police training schools as an example of how crimes can go unsolved due to a lack of attention to detail and underestimation of witness testimony. Perhaps the main lesson of this tragic story lies not only in how the killer was caught, but also in how long he went unnoticed among us.